We've talked a lot about DreamWorks movies on this channel before, but I kept coming back to this one thing that was bothering me. If you actually look at what the villain was trying to do, some of these come terrifyingly close to ending everything. So, armed with this perfect excuse to binge watch 53 movies and still feel productive because it's research, I went through all the DreamWorks films, pulled out every threat that could have actually ended everything, and ranked them. Starting from the bottom. Tier 1, Mind Break Apocalypses. Okay, so Captain Underpants is probably the one on this list that makes you go, wait, this doesn't belong here. And honestly, I get that. But hear me out for a second, because Professor Poopy Pants and his humorlessness ray is actually way more disturbing than it sounds when you think about how important humor is for human beings. So the plan is simple: zap everyone with the humorlessness ray and make it so nobody on Earth can laugh or find anything funny ever again. Humor isn't just about telling jokes and having a good time. It's literally how humans cope with everything terrible that happens to them. It's how soldiers deal with war, how doctors deal with death every single day, how people get through grief and trauma, and all the genuinely horrible stuff that life throws at them. When something terrible happens, the first thing humans do is eventually find a way to laugh about it, because that's how we process pain and keep going. So now imagine that's just gone overnight for every single person on Earth simultaneously. Mental health would collapse almost immediately because humans are genuinely not built to process pain and stress and trauma without humor as a tool. Depression and anxiety would skyrocket across the entire global population over time. It's honestly hard to put a death toll on this one because it's not a physical threat, but history shows us that when human mental health collapses on a large scale, self-deletion rates climb, violence increases, and societies start fracturing in ways that are really hard to recover from. So, in my view, this is one of the most unique threats on this entire list. It doesn't go after your body, or your planet, or your timeline, but it does go after the one thing that makes surviving everything else even possible. And weirdly, the movie right next to it does basically the same thing. Just to children specifically. Rise of the Guardians is one of those films that people underestimate because it's colorful and it's got Santa Claus in it and the Easter Bunny is Australian for some reason. But Pitch Black is genuinely one of the scariest villains in anything DreamWorks has ever made. And I don't think people give him enough credit for that. He wants to cover the entire world in darkness and fear and eternal nightmares. And the way he does it is by making kids stop believing in the Guardians. Because the Guardians only exist and have power as long as children believe in them. Once that belief is gone, they just fade away into nothing. When Pitch's Nightmare Sand starts replacing the Dream Sand, kids everywhere stop sleeping peacefully and start waking up terrified every single night with no relief and no hope anywhere. And this isn't only talking about bad dreams, because sleep deprivation and chronic fear in children causes genuine, long-lasting psychological damage that follows them into adulthood, but also about an entire global generation of children growing up with severe anxiety, inability to trust anything, completely unable to imagine that the world could be safe or good or worth caring about. Now, scale that up to every single child on Earth at the same time, because that's exactly what Pitch is doing. And think about what that generation looks like when they grow up. A whole generation raised entirely on fear and nightmares with no wonder, no hope, no belief that anything good exists. That's not just sad. That's genuinely catastrophic for what human civilization becomes in 20 to 30 years. Now, you can't put a body count on this one, and that's exactly what makes it so unsettling. Because nobody is dying directly, but an entire generation is being psychologically destroyed in a way that would reshape what humanity even looks like going forward. And it would lead to the same disastrous mental health collapse that the humorlessness ray would have caused. Pitch isn't trying to end humanity physically, he's trying to end the part of being human that makes any of it worth anything in the first place. So both of those threats are difficult to rank because the damage is all internal and psychological. There's no crater anywhere, no body count you can point to. But from here, the threats start to get a lot more concrete, because this is where the buildings start coming down. Megamind is one of those movies where you forget how terrifying it gets because it's funny the whole time, and then you remember that Titan literally lifts a skyscraper and drops it in the middle of downtown, like he's tossing a soda can. Hal was always a bit of a creep, honestly, but Megamind handing superpowers to someone with that many unresolved issues was always going to end badly. He renames himself Titan, spells it wrong, gets rejected by Roxanne, and then decides the correct response is to terrorize Metro City until somebody gives him attention. He throws Megamind through a building, smashes through a gas tanker, and laser beams Titanville into the cityscape. Later, when he kidnaps Roxanne, he traps her on the top of Metro Tower, cuts it in half, and then when Megamind rescues her, he throws the tower at them both, smashing a bunch of other buildings, cars, and God knows what else in the process. I don't even know how to quantify the death toll from that level of damage, but let's give it a shot. A large office tower during business hours can hold thousands of people. Standard planning models often use roughly 100 to 150 square feet per person for office occupancy. Stack that across 40 or 50 floors and you land in the ballpark of 8 to 12,000 people inside one skyscraper on a normal day. So when Titan lifts a tower and drops it, you're looking at roughly 10,000 to 15,000 people per building depending on occupancy. Titan takes out, what, 4 major buildings in his first rampage alone? That's 40,000 to 60,000 people dead in the first 20 minutes, just from the collapses themselves. But it gets worse. Way worse. When a building pancakes into the street, it ruptures gas lines, shatters water mains, overloads electrical systems, and blocks roads with debris that emergency crews cannot clear in minutes. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake resulted in more than 3,000 deaths, and much of that devastation comes from fires after infrastructure failed. Titan is doing that same thing over and over without giving the city any time to breathe between hits. Metro City looks like a modern metro area in the low millions. If we use 3 million as a reasonable stand-in, then even a 1% mortality shock across the urban population is 30,000 dead. Push that to 2 or 3% in the hardest hit zones, and you are looking at 60 to 90,000 casualties within a day or two. And Metro City technically survives this, but a city where tens of thousands of people died in a single afternoon because one guy with superpowers had a bad week, that's a different city now, and everyone still living in it knows. And the next tier takes this to the next level. Sinbad is one of those movies that pretty much nobody talks about anymore. It came out the same summer as Finding Nemo and got absolutely buried. Which is a shame because if you actually look at what Eris is doing in it, the threat is way more interesting than a lot of the more popular movies on this list. Eris disguises herself as Sinbad and steals the Book of Peace, which is presented literally as the thing keeping every kingdom and city in the 12 cities stable and functioning. Every trade route, every food system, every government that keeps, millions of people alive, all of it depends on that book existing, and Eris wants that symbol gone, because she's literally the goddess of discord, so peace is the one thing she can't stand. Sinbad gets sentenced to death for the theft, but Proteus offers himself up instead. But surprise surprise, Eris expected this and reveals that she was hoping Proteus would die, because if heir of Syracuse dies, the kingdom falls into chaos. So let's actually talk about what that collapse could look like if it actually happened, because this is where it gets dark, literally. Syracuse is a major port city. Ports live on trade. Food moves in and out by ship. If the Book of Peace is gone and Syracuse's leadership collapses, trust breaks down first. Not just in Syracuse, but across the 12 cities. Ships stop docking, prices rise, people panic. To give this some real-world scale, historians estimate that large ancient Mediterranean empires reach populations in the tens of millions. The Roman Empire, for example, is often estimated between about 50 to 90 million people at its height. So when we talk about civilization collapse in that connected world, we are talking about trade networks and cities supporting tens of millions. Now, I'm not saying Eris wipes out the entire ancient world in a week. The movie does not show that. What I am saying is this: if a destabilizing event spreads across connected coastal states, and war breaks out between major ports, and trade shuts down long enough for harvest cycles to fail and supply lines to snap, then even a 5 to 10% mortality shock over a decade becomes massive. In a 60 to 80 million population world, that is 3 to 8 million deaths, and that is a conservative figure compared to full famine scenarios in history. What makes Eris disturbing is that she does not need to swing a sword. She pulls one political thread and waits. But this next chapter is the exact opposite of that. Kung Fu Panda 2 is the rare sequel that's genuinely better than the original in almost every way. But let's ignore that and actually talk about what Shen is trying to do here. Because the threat in this movie is the complete and total military conquest of an entire continent. So Shen goes paranoid after he hears the prophecy and wipes all the pandas. Well, not all of them, but you get the point. He's exiled by his parents, and so he goes into hiding, swearing to someday bring all of China to heel. 30 years later, he returns to Gongmen City with his ultimate weapon, a cannon. And not just one cannon, he's built an entire fleet of ships loaded with them. His plan is to use this weapon to destroy Kung Fu completely and then march across all of China and take everything. So let's say that Shen actually pulled this off. Ancient China around the 9th century had somewhere around 50 to 80 million people living across its cities and villages, and Shen's fleet of cannon ships moving up the rivers of China would have been completely unstoppable because the entire military defense system of this world is built around Kung Fu, and Kung Fu just got wiped out. Every city along those waterfalls, every village gets razed, every person who tries to resist just gets blown apart by weapons they've never seen before and have no idea how to fight. The numbers get really staggering because military conquest on this scale kills a lot of people. When an army this powerful moves through a population with no resistance, you're looking at cities being destroyed, food supplies being seized or burned, trade routes being cut off, and entire populations being either killed or enslaved to serve Shen's new empire. If Shen's cannons actually wipe out Kung Fu as a defense system, and he starts taking river cities one after another, I'm putting the death toll at 10% to 20% over multiple years from a mix of direct slaughter, destroyed food supplies, agriculture, broken trade, and disease from mass displacement. So that's about 5 to 16 million people. And that's probably being generous. Because the moment Kung Fu is gone, the entire continent has no defense mechanism left whatsoever, and Shen's fleet can just move from city to city with nothing slowing it down at all. But the threat to China isn't over yet. The third film takes the same world and finds an even more unsettling way to end it. Because Kai wants to suck the chi out of every living Kung Fu master and panda alive. And if you think about what that actually means on a large scale, this might be one of the most horrifying scenarios on the list. He's already enslaved every Kung Fu master in the spirit realm for over 500 years. So he's building an army made entirely out of the best fighters who ever existed, and he's using them to collect more. Here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. When chi is stolen from a person, they don't die. Instead, they turn into jade fighters or zombies that do Kai's bidding. He doesn't even need to take everyone. He just needs enough masters that nobody left can resist him, and then he can move from region to region with a force that literally cannot be beaten because the only people capable of stopping it are now on his side. So the death toll is mostly indirect. The first deaths are from fighting and fear. Some towns resist, some towns surrender. After that, you get the old pattern. Farms don't get planted or harvested on time, grains get seized, trade routes become unsafe, refugees pack into crowded places, sickness spreads, and the government stops being able to control the edges. For a real-world benchmark on war plus disease plus displacement over several years, historians often cite around 15 to 20% of the population decline in the German lands during the 30 Years' War because the fighting and epidemics together crushed normal life. I use that as the upper ruler. For Kai, since his first move is targeted, I'd put the secondary death toll a bit lower, more like 5% to 15% over a few years, which in a 50 to 80 million world comes out to about 2.5 to 12 million deaths. It starts as a targeted hunt for masters, and it ends with the country losing the exact people who would normally stop a collapse, while those same people become the tool that's spreading. Next we have How to Train Your Dragon 2. Drago Bloodfist is one of those DreamWorks villains who I think gets slept on a little because he's in a franchise where the dragons and the relationships are the main draw. But the guy's plan is actually one of the most strategically sound on this entire list. He's gathering an army of dragons, and to do this, he has tamed the Bewilder Beast, the Alpha Dragon. That behemoth can override the will of every lesser dragon and put them under its spell. So, with the Alpha under his control, he has an army that grows every time he conquers some new place. Every settlement he defeats adds more dragons to his side. That's the snowball effect that makes this scary. If we assume Drago actually wins, then this stops being a story about one battle in the ice and turns into something much bigger. Because Drago's goal is world domination. He wants control over the dragons, and by extension, control over people. Now, without Toothless as a deterrent, think about what that means in this kind of world. There isn't a dense empire with stone fortresses and millions of people. From all that we know, it's scattered island chains, coastal settlements, northern territories, people living in fishing communities, and small towns. A reasonable population for the wider world in this setting might be somewhere between 1 and 3 million people total. If Drago wins that first major confrontation and keeps pushing, the first year is going to be brutal. Settlements that resist get burned from the sky. Fleets are destroyed in their own harbors. Dragons that once defended villages are turned and used to level them instead. There's no real counter to that. You can't outmarch flying firepower. You can't hide behind walls when the attack comes from above. Historically, in medieval-style conquests without dragons, regions can lose 10-20% of their population through direct violence and the instability that follows. Now add total aerial dominance and forced dragon conscription, and those numbers don't get smaller. In areas that resist, you're again realistically looking at something like 15-30% of the population dying within a couple of years. Some of that is direct attacks, some of it is famine after storehouses are destroyed or seized, some of it is displacement, people fleeing into land that can't support them. War always brings disease and hunger behind it. If Drago keeps expanding and half the known world ends up fighting at some point, you could see 20-40% of the global population dead over the course of a prolonged conquest. On a 1 to 3 million population base, that's 200,000 to over 1 million deaths. But the part that really shifts this from big war to civilization level event isn't just the death toll. It's the permanent change in how the world works. Dragons stop being partners and become centralized weapons. Every rebellion gets crushed instantly because Drago controls the skies. Trade routes exist only with his approval. Political independence disappears. Cultures get flattened. People survive, humanity doesn't go extinct, but the world as it existed before dies. Once one man can flip a switch and take control of the most powerful creatures on the planet, he becomes impossible to oppose. You have to bend the knee or die. It's the end of a free world. And yet, that's still not the worst that can happen. What happens in the next tier is different because we're not even really the point of it. We're just caught in the middle of something much bigger than us. Next on the list is home, which most people just remember as that cute movie where an alien befriends a girl trying to find her mom. But let's actually talk about what's happening in this movie because this is genuinely one of the wildest situations on this entire list. Like, we're not dealing with one extinction level threat here, we're dealing with 2 at the exact same time. The Boov arrive on Earth, and in their own cheerful way, they relocate all of humanity to what they call Happy Human Town camps in the Australian outback while they move into everyone's houses. And at the time the movie came out in 2015, the global population was around 7.3 billion people. Think about what that actually means. You take 7.3 billion people and you compress them into one remote region that, in the real world, is a desert with no water infrastructure and extreme heat in many areas. That region is not designed to feed or hydrate billions of people. Food systems collapse immediately because nothing is set up to feed that many people in one place. Clean water becomes almost impossible to distribute. Disease starts spreading almost instantly because that's just what happens when you cram that many people together with no infrastructure to support them. If even 5 to 15% of the relocated population cannot be sustained during the first year due to food, water, and disease stress, that translates to 365 million to over 1 billion people. That range alone makes this one of the largest single-forced humanitarian crises imaginable. But, okay, here's where it gets so much worse. Because while all of that is already happening, the Gorg are coming. They are chasing the Boov because Captain Smek stole what he calls the Shusher, which as it turns out carries the entire next generation of Gorg. So they genuinely do not care about anything that happens to be in the way when they do it. The Gorg vessel itself is massive, like chasing an entire alien fleet across the galaxy massive, which means the weapons on that thing are built to destroy a civilization that already has technology so advanced it makes everything humans have ever built look like nothing. If the Gorg decided that Earth needed to go to get the Boov, that's it. Humanity is just done. And the most terrifying part of all of this is that humanity didn't cause any of it and couldn't stop any of it. We had no weapons, no technology, no plan, literally nothing that could have made a difference against either of these two threats. This is a dual planetary extinction event, one grinding us down slowly through starvation and disease, and one that could just instantly erase whatever's left, and we were just completely irrelevant to both of them. Horrifying! But we're not done yet. In Monsters vs. Aliens, the scale of what's happening kinda sneaks up on you. There's a giant woman, a mad scientist cockroach, a blob, a fish guy, a lot of jokes. But if you just focus on Galaxar for a second, you'll realize that what he's doing is not small. So Galaxar has found this thing called Quantonium on Earth, and he needs it to power his cloning machine so he can make millions of copies of himself to repopulate a planet because, well, he destroyed his own. And again, we humans are just in the way. But instead of having the decency to relocate us like the Boov, Galaxar has other plans for us. When his giant robot ship shows up over San Francisco, you can see right away that we're completely outmatched. Every weapon the military throws at it just bounces off like we're throwing pebbles. The technology gap between us and Galaxar is so massive that we might as well not even have weapons at all. But it gets so much worse once he actually gets the Quantonium and fires up his cloning machine. This thing can crank out thousands of Galaxar clones in seconds. So what do you think happens to us? We have to go because there is no negotiation here. If he decides to do this systematically by destroying every major city on Earth, which seems like the obvious move, you're looking at absolute devastation. About 55% of Earth's population lives in urban areas, and that's over 4 billion people. And when you destroy all the major population centers, you're also destroying all the infrastructure that keeps everyone else alive. Water treatment plants, power stations, gas lines, pharmaceutical factories, the works. Those secondary deaths from starvation and disease and just complete systemic collapse could easily be another 2 to 3 billion people over the next few months. So you're looking at a total death toll of maybe 6 to 7 billion people if Galaxar's plan actually works, which is like 75 to 85% of humanity just gone. And the people who survive? Well, they're not rebuilding civilization or anything. They're just living on a planet that's being taken over by millions of alien clones who have all the advanced technology while humans are back to basically nothing. And the horrors just keep piling up. The next tier includes movies that I genuinely had the hardest time convincing myself belonged here because neither of them involves an invasion or a villain with a plan. But I promise, both of them get real dark real fast.
He's just a little bee! And he happens to be the nicest bee I've met in a long time.
Long time?
I know what you're thinking, but hear me out, because underneath all the memes and the weird human bee romance subplot, Bee Movie is actually describing one of the most plausible, slow-motion apocalypses on this entire list. The movie unfolds disaster when bees go on strike. The biological impacts can end a whole civilization. Bees are basically the penises of plants. They carry pollen from male plants to the female plants. Pollen is essentially plant sperm, and without bees to carry it around from plant to plant, plants cannot make plant babies. You know, stuff like grains and fruits. Without seeds and fruits, we have nothing to eat because that's like 90% of our food. We also can't have new plants because plants grow from seeds. If the old plants stop making new plants, all the plants just die out. Without the plants, everything that eats them starts dying. Without those things, everything that eats them starts dying. The insects that eat the plants die, the bird that eats the insects die, same thing among animals. Herbivores like cows die first, then carnivores, then omnivores like us die next because all of our food is gone. The whole food chain collapses from the bottom up, and there's nothing anyone can do once it's started. IPBES estimates pollinator-dependent crops contribute about 35% of global crop production volume. And that is a huge chunk of the foods that make up our modern diets. Now here's the simplest way I'd quantify the Bee Movie scenario without getting cute about it. If pollination falls hard enough that you effectively lose that 30 to 40% of pollinator-dependent production across multiple regions in the same year, then you are looking at a world where a big slice of fresh food disappears in one growing cycle. Now the first impact from that would be price spikes and shortages, which alone could go well into the hundreds of billions. The second is hunger spreading into places that usually buy their way out of trouble. We already live in a world where 733 million people faced hunger in 2023, so the quote-unquote starting line is already brutal. Today's pollination shortfalls, which are linked to a 3 to 5% loss of fruits, vegetables, and nuts, are associated with about 427,000 excess deaths per year, mostly through diet-related health effects. If the Bee Movie strike pushes losses closer to that 30 to 40% range and keeps it there across several harvests, then the health and famine pressure scales up into the millions. And over 3 to 5 years of repeated shortages, conflict, and displacement, a plausible death range is 10 to 30 million, with hundreds of millions more pushed into severe food insecurity depending on how fast countries can adapt and how badly trade locks up. This is the slow motion apocalypse that would swallow us all. Next on the list is The Croods, which is a cute prehistoric family adventure on the surface, but that surface is actively coming apart. Set in a fictional prehistoric Cretaceous period, the continental plates are shifting at a catastrophic speed, and the end is coming. So let's talk about what continental drift at this speed actually does, because, spoiler alert, everything dies. We follow the family as their cave gets wiped out by that huge quake at the start. The ground keeps splitting open in front of them, and the whole journey is basically them trying to stay ahead of a landmass that keeps crumbling under its own weight. Mass extinctions have happened before on our planet. They weren't due to continental drift because tectonic plates don't move that fast. But there are other precedents. About 252 million years ago, there was something called the Permian-Triassic extinction, which is the worst mass extinction event we know of. So, if tectonic plates moved at crude speed, Earth's crust would fail everywhere along plate boundaries. The Permian-Triassic extinction killed around 96% of everything in the oceans and 70% of everything on land. And that was caused by volcanic activity and climate collapse happening over thousands of years. The Croods world is doing that in weeks. So what does that actually look like? Well, the immediate deaths would come from the physical event itself. When a tectonic plate moves just 20 feet, it causes a tsunami. I hate to think what would happen when all the plates are moving so fast that we can actually watch them move without needing super sensitive sensors. Then the sun gets blocked out by volcanic ash. While that ash and haze alone are enough to disrupt plant growth and water systems, that's how food chains start thinning out. Plants can't photosynthesize anymore, so they start dying. Then the animals start dying off. The whole food chain just collapses from the bottom up, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And that's not even counting all the smaller disasters. Water sources dry up or get contaminated when the ground shifts. Migration routes get cut off by new chasms or mountain ranges that literally weren't there yesterday. Forests that took centuries to grow just vanish overnight because the ground underneath them splits apart. Human population in a prehistoric setting would be sparse. A reasonable and continental estimate is somewhere in the 10,000 to 200,000 range, scattered in small groups rather than dense settlements. If the instability lasts months into years, survival rates drop hard. A broad estimate would be 40% to 90% mortality, depending on how long the volcanic and tectonic activity continues and how much stable land remains. That works out to roughly 4,000 to 180,000 human deaths across that range. Wildlife losses would likely be higher proportionally, since most species can't adapt quickly to rapid habitat loss and climate swings. If the event is global, the numbers go way up, and you're looking at a true mass extinction scenario. And it's not just humans. Millions of plant, animal, and insect species also get wiped out. Forever. The land changes faster than life can adjust, and whatever survives is doing it in a completely altered environment with most of the old ecosystem gone. The Prince of Egypt is the only movie on this list that I think actually earns the word epic in the classical sense. It is genuinely one of the best animated films ever made, and I will die on that hill. An epic story of Moses leading his people to freedom. But the reason it's on this list is because what happens in the third act is, if you look at it without the framing of liberation and freedom, the 10 plagues are one of the most systematic destructions of a civilization ever committed to animation. The thing about the plagues is they don't just kill people directly, at least not most of them. They destroy infrastructure first, which is honestly worse because it means people die slowly. Water turns to blood so nobody can drink it, then frogs everywhere, then lice, then flies, livestock dies, boils break out, hail destroys crops, locusts eat whatever's left, then darkness for 3 days straight. Each one of these in its own would be a massive crisis, but all of them back to back over a few months? Then you're looking at societal collapse happening in real time. And we're talking about Egypt here, one of the most powerful civilizations in the ancient world with probably 3 to 4 million people. Let's start with water turning to blood. The Nile is everything to Egypt. Drinking water, transportation, irrigation, food supply from fishing. When it becomes undrinkable, people start dying of dehydration within days because there's no backup for millions of people. The movie shows Egyptians digging along the riverbank trying to find clean water, but that's not sustainable. If even 2% of the population dies from dehydration and disease in the first plague alone, that's 60,000 to 80,000 people dead already. Then the livestock plague comes, and in an agricultural society like Egypt, when your farm animals die, you're screwed because food production just collapses. Egypt's economy runs on agriculture, and this plague destroyed the foundation, which means famine is coming within months. And we haven't even gotten to the worst one yet. The 10th plague, which was the death of every firstborn in Egypt, was carried out by the Angel of Death. This angel is shown as a white apparition moving through the streets, from door to door, taking the lives of all the firstborns. Let's talk numbers now. If Egypt has 3 to 4 million people, and roughly 25% of families have a firstborn child, or the father is a firstborn in his own family, you're looking at least 750,000 to 1 million people dead in a single night, all at once. That's genocide. And it's not just the deaths, it's who dies. Firstborns include the next generation of leaders, heirs to trades and businesses, eldest sons who were supposed to take care of families. Egypt's social structure just collapsed because an entire generation of future leaders is gone. The psychological impact is almost worse. Every single household wakes up to find someone dead. Like, seriously, every family. At the same time, the collective trauma would destroy society's ability to function because people wouldn't work, trade, or trust anything anymore. Add up all 10 plagues, dehydration and disease from the water, starvation from destroyed livestock and crops, and the firstborn deaths, you're looking at 1.2 to 1.5 million people dead. That's 30 to 40% of Egypt's population in weeks. For context, the Black Death killed 30 to 50% of Europe over 4 years. This is happening faster, more concentrated, and unlike disease you can try to avoid. There's no escape from these plagues. They're hitting everyone everywhere at once. That's what divine wrath and its consequences look like. Now onto the final tier. Everything up until now, as bad as it gets, is at least happening in a version of reality that still makes sense. But this last tier is where that stops being true. Shrek Forever After is honestly the forgotten Shrek movie. Most people remember the first two, some people remember the third one for being not great, and then this one kind of just exists. And this one is pretty weird because the threat here isn't like anything else we've talked about, because it's reality itself just getting erased and overwritten with a worse version. In Shrek Forever After, Shrek signs away the day he was born. That's the deal, one day erased from history. But if you remove the day Shrek was born, you remove Shrek. And if you remove Shrek, you remove everything that only happened because he existed. So what changes? Well, for starters, Fiona is never rescued. In this timeline, she eventually escapes on her own, but the version of Fiona who fell in love, had 3 children, and ruled beside Shrek doesn't exist. That life is gone. That marriage is gone. And their kids? They were never born. When Shrek and Fiona changed how Far, Far Away worked, that affected hundreds of thousands of people. The kingdom became more tolerant, safer for outcasts. In the alternate reality, Rumpelstiltskin's running everything, and it's objectively worse. Ogres getting hunted, witches doing whatever they want, the whole place is an authoritarian nightmare. Far, Far Away probably has like 200,000 to 300,000 people, and every single one of them was living in a better reality because Shrek existed. All of those people get erased and replaced with worse versions living under tyranny who have no idea things could have been different. That's not death in the traditional sense, but functionally it's the same thing. These people who should have existed don't anymore, and the replacements have worse lives and no memory of what they lost. And if the contract doesn't get broken before sunrise, this alternative reality becomes permanent. Everyone from the original timeline is gone forever. This is what makes reality manipulation way scarier than physical apocalypses. When a meteor hits or a plague spreads, at least the universe stays consistent. People die, but reality itself stays intact. But when you erase someone from history, you're not just killing them. You're retroactively making it so they never mattered. Every choice they made, every person they helped, every life they touched just gets undone. So, if it weren't for the true love's kiss breaking the contract, then we would have watched an entire reality permanently erased and replaced with a nightmare version where nothing that happened before ever mattered. Up next is an even more horrifying alternate reality. Okay, so Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was deep and beautiful, But let's put all that aside for a second and actually talk about what Jack Horner is trying to do here, because when you break it down, this is genuinely one of the most catastrophic threats on this entire list. So Jack Horner wants the wishing star, and his wish is simple. He wants all the magic in the world for himself, every single bit of it. Now, this is a world where magic is literally the foundation of everything. Every creature, every kingdom, every living thing that makes this world what it is because magic exists. Think about it like this. Imagine someone could drain every single drop of oxygen from Earth's atmosphere and absorb it into themselves, and every living thing that depended on that oxygen just stops existing instantly. That's essentially what Jack is trying to do, but with magic. Now let's actually talk about scale. The worlds of Puss in Boots and Shrek are absolutely packed with magical beings. Talking animals, giants, witches, fairy godmothers, enchanted creatures of every kind, and every single one of them exists because magic exists. The moment Jack absorbs all of it, every magical being on the planet just vanishes instantly. And Jack doesn't stop at just taking the magic, because once he has it all and an unlimited wish on top of that, you now have one person with the power to literally reshape reality however he wants, with absolutely nothing capable of stopping him. And if you've watched this movie, you know Jack Horner is not exactly the kind of person you want having that kind of power. This is a guy who wiped out an entire factory of workers without even thinking about it. So you're looking at two catastrophes hitting back to back. First, the instant erasure of every magical being in the entire world, and then one completely unhinged person with unlimited reality-bending power deciding what happens to everyone who's left, and history tells us pretty clearly that unlimited power in the hands of someone with zero empathy never ends well for anyone. This is a magical world extinction event, a complete restructuring of what the world even is. First by erasing every magical being that makes it unique, and then by handing total control of whatever's left to someone who genuinely could not care less about any of it. That's a story about how close an entire world came to being permanently erased and rebuilt in the image of one man's completely unchecked greed. Now comes the absolute worst case scenario on this entire list. And look, I want to acknowledge how absurd it is that the #1 spot goes to the movie about the talking dog and his adopted son, but here we are. Because every other movie we've talked about, even the reality erasure in Shrek, even Jack Horner draining the world of all of its magic, at least the universe itself keeps existing. There is still something left. But in Mr. Peabody and Sherman, that changes. It all begins with Sherman using the Wayback Machine without permission. He goes to ancient Egypt to impress Penny. They interfere with major historical events. Penny almost marries King Tut, and that alone is a massive historical ripple waiting to happen. But things get much worse once the timeline produces duplicates. 2 Shermans, 2 Peabodys, same individuals occupying the same present moment. You can't have duplicates as the universe has rules, and when you break those rules badly enough, reality itself starts tearing apart at the seams. And then you see what that looks like. The sky starts tearing open with black hole-like rifts. Different time periods start to bleed into each other. Ancient Egypt mixing with Renaissance Italy, mixing with the French Revolution France, mixing with modern New York. George Washington, Einstein, Da Vinci, Lincoln. All of them getting pulled from the exact points in history where they were supposed to be doing the specific things that built everything that came after them. So if we're being realistic about it, then Einstein getting pulled out of 1905 means no special relativity. And without that, you're eventually losing GPS, nuclear physics. Modern cosmology Da Vinci extracted from Renaissance Florence means centuries of influence on engineering and anatomy and art just don't ripple forward the way they actually did. Each extraction of a single person removes a chain of consequences that stretches hundreds of years forward into everything we take for granted. Now, here's the most unsettling thing in the whole film. At the very end, after the vortex gets closed, Peabody himself says he's satisfied the timeline is contaminated only in minor ways. Only. They fixed it. They closed the vortex. And history is still permanently, admittedly wrong, just a little bit, forever. So if you take that logic and follow it backwards to the question of what happens if the vortex doesn't close, if it just keeps going and keeps pulling and keeps emptying moment after moment, what you're looking at isn't the universe exploding or ceasing to exist, it's something stranger than that. It's the sequence of cause and effect that produced agriculture and science and language and civilization just becoming unsortable. History works because things happen in a specific order and each thing makes the next thing possible. Take that away, scramble it badly enough that causes and effects stop connecting to each other, and nothing accumulates into anything. The version of the world that produced us just becomes one possible arrangement among an infinite pile of moments that don't lead anywhere anymore. Speaking of things that don't play by the rules of reality, if you like this one, then check out my video on how much Bill Cipher's actions cost Gravity Falls. Links up here.